Is race something we can explain in terms of social and historical features of our world? I'm Дейвид Мигел Грей. Welcome to the second section of part 3 of our series on racial ontology, a guide for the perplexed. In the first section of part 3, I discussed just what it means to think of things in the world as being social kinds as opposed to natural kinds. I also laid out some common features of socially constructed categories. In the second section, part 3b, we will look at features common to socio-historical theories of race, as well as some examples of socio-historical properties. Given our new and better understanding of social properties and social kinds, we're now in an excellent position to get back to our initial question: is race something we can explain in terms of social and historical features of our world? If races are not entirely the products of nature, that means that races are, in part or in whole, products of human actions or decision-making processes. We can investigate and discover things about races, but these investigations are social and historical investigations, quite unlike the investigations in the natural sciences. As such, in order for a socio-historical account of race to be correct, you must show both that races exist and at least one property that goes into forming the right concept of race has to be social. Recall our comparison in the last video between naturally based kinds, like tropical storms and depressions, and one potential account of races. This showed that even if races are defined totally in terms of natural properties, if the way we group racial properties is arbitrarily or not defined by natural differences, that grouping is a social property, thus making races social kinds. That being said, most of those who adopt a socio-historical theory of races think that races have other socio-historical properties as well. We should note that thinking of races as defined as social kinds rather than natural kinds leads to an important difference between these two kinds of theories. For socio-historical theories of race, what counts as racial properties will not be a universal feature of the race, as it will for naturalist theories. Rather, racial properties will be localized to the communities in which these properties are constructed. To put it differently, since the concept of race emerges among a group of people, given the people present in that community and the goals and interests of that community, racial concepts could vary in different communities or in the same community at different times. One real-world upshot of racial properties being local is that if you live in a country where one race concept is used, and you travel to another country that uses a different race concept, that new community might consider you to be of a different race. So if racial properties are determined locally, a point in favor of a socio-historical theory of race would be if we could find social properties that are present in a race concept in one location, but not in another. Another point in favor of a socio-historical theory would be if we could show that certain properties were either added or removed from our concept of race. If races are natural kinds, such shifts would be difficult, or not occur at all. One such property, which might be familiar to students of U.S. history, is the theory of hypodescent. Hypodescent is the idea that if someone is of mixed race or socioeconomic ancestry, then the offspring is determined by what is considered to be the lower class or subordinate race. In the U.S., for example, this practice was codified into the laws of several states such as Tennessee and Virginia. These laws were extreme hypodescent laws stating that if a person had any black ancestry, they were considered to be black. The arbitrariness of just choosing one race to determine the race of the offspring speaks to the social nature of hypodescent. As some social properties usually serve a purpose, we might ask, what purpose does hypodescent serve? Historian David Hollinger tells us that, quote, "The principle of hypodescent originates in the property interest of slaveholders. Children begotten upon slave women by their owners or by other white men would grow up as slaves, adding to the property of the owners of women and preserving the amazingly durable fiction that male slaveholders and the other white males in the vicinity were faithful to their wives." End quote. So the idea that there was a clear interest being served by hypodescent yields more support to the idea that racial properties are, at least in part, social properties. Additionally, the fact that different locations don't always employ theories of hypodescent, that even the U.S. has not consistently employed hypodescent in thinking about race, strengthens the case for the socio-historical theory of race. Notice that while we might think of one's ancestral relations as natural properties, the decision to deem some of those relationships as full determinants of one's race is to use that natural property for social purpose. This is a feature of our understanding of race that naturalist theories of race have difficulties in accounting for. So we have now seen how socio-historical theories of race have to be local, And we have also seen how local concerns and conventions can shape the properties we assign to race. But we might ask, what would a full socio-historical theory of race look like? One of the earliest examples philosophers turn to is that of W.E.B. Du Bois's account of race from his 1897 speech, The Conservation of Races. Du Bois states that, quote, "What then is a race? It is a vast family of human beings, generally of common blood and language, always of common history, traditions, and impulses, who are both voluntarily and involuntarily striving together for the accomplishment of certain more or less vividly conceived ideals of life." End quote. What seems to be central to Du Bois's account of race is the role of history, traditions, and the pursuit of common ideals of life. In making this proposal, Du Bois radically shifted our ideas of how to study race, suggesting a new domain of research as well as good tools one might need to study races. W.E.B. Du Bois's work on the race theory has shaped and informed several socio-historical theories of race. Please see the description below for some suggested readings. Some final questions to think about concerning socio-historical accounts of race are: do races have elements of artifacts, naturally based kinds, both, or something altogether different? Also, are socio-historical accounts of race better or worse than naturalist accounts of race for capturing our understanding of what races are? In Part 4, we will discuss a radically different set of theories which claim that races as we currently think of them do not exist.